Have you ever stopped to think why you accept so little from someone who should offer you so much? It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But the truth is that a lot of women confuse crumbs with a feast and think that this is love. And the craziest thing, many don't even realize that they're trapped in a cycle of personal devaluation because they learned back then that love comes with pain, effort, and sacrifice. There is a silent but devastating belief that accompanies those with low self-esteem. I don't deserve more than this. And that's why you cling to toxic relationships, normalize absence, swallow disrespect, accept the minimum. Not because you like it, but because you think it's the most you can get. But what if I told you that this had nothing to do with the other person, and everything to do with the way you see yourself? Today you're going to understand how emotional insecurity, anxious, attachment, and fear of rejection are sabotaging your chances of a real love relationship. And the best part, you'll discover where to start turning this game around. Some women think they're loving, but in reality they're settling for crumbs. When low self-esteem takes over, the filter of emotional reality becomes distorted. She can no longer see how much she is worth. Any minimal show of affection becomes a grand gesture, and someone's presence seems to be enough to call it love. But this isn't love. It's emotional survival. And the worst thing is that the more she accepts the minimum, the more she believes that's all she can get. Emotional dependence sneaks up on her, disguised as anxious attachment, fear of rejection, unresolved emotional abandonment. She thinks, at least he's here. But she doesn't realize that being there is not the same as caring. A healthy love relationship requires much more than physical presence. It requires emotional presence, reciprocity, emotional worthiness. The problem is that when the lack of self-love is profound, even a text message at 3 a.m. seems like a declaration of love. Want a practical example? A woman with well-developed self-worth is not charmed by shallow gestures. If a man disappears for days and returns as if nothing had happened, she doesn't call it love. She questions. She takes a stand. Because she understands that emotional acceptance begins with herself. But for someone who lives in emotional insecurity, every crumb seems like a feast. And this perception, often unconscious, paves the way for the next silent pattern that traps her in toxic relationships. When a woman carries unhealed emotional wounds, affective need becomes a blurred filter. She begins to see attention as love, control as care, and intermittent presence as a deep bond. Emotional dependence is strengthened when the fear of rejection outweighs reason, and so she comes to accept coldness, absence, and disrespect, as long as he doesn't leave. The fear of emotional abandonment shouts louder than the desire to be treated well. In practice, this translates into tolerating in-depth conversations, short answers, prolonged silences, and constant disappearances. All of this hurts, but it seems less painful than the idea of being alone. Instead of looking for a balanced love relationship, she settles for a relationship where she has to explain herself all the time, justify her emotions, and beg for crumbs of attention. The fear of being alone makes her subject herself to much, less than she really deserves. If she had emotional security and a stronger sense of self-worth, she would see these behaviors for what they are: personal devaluation. But when her self-esteem is in pieces, she believes she needs to be less in order to be accepted. And this is the start of a cycle that gets quieter and quieter, but also more destructive. Because every time she accepts less, her inner voice weakens a little more. Few people realize it, but this cycle is treacherous. Every time a woman swallows her tears, keeps quiet in the face of disrespect, or pretends not to care about a disappearance, she sends a message to her own heart. This is what I deserve. And the most dangerous thing, this becomes true inside her. The lack of self-love begins to seem normal, and the idea of deserving affection withers away. Gradually, she begins to doubt whether there really is anything better out there. This is how a romantic relationship stops being an exchange and becomes a silent battlefield. She tries to please, to adapt, not to cause problems. She gives up her own desires to maintain an us that barely sustains the basics, and all the time, she believes she's being mature, understanding, and resilient. But deep down, this attitude reveals emotional insecurity, fear of rejection, and an anxious attachment that only grows. And with every crumb she accepts, she loses the ability to recognize her own value. If you want to break this cycle, the first step is simple but profound. Observe. Observe when you keep quiet, when you diminish yourself, when you convince yourself that it's not that big a deal. A practical tip? Write down everything you've tolerated over the last few months and then ask yourself, would I recommend this kind of relationship to a friend I love? This answer may open a wound, but it may also begin to heal it. Many people grow up thinking that their childhood story is in the past, but the truth is that emotionally, that girl still lives inside you. If she was ignored, criticized, or blamed for feeling too much, chances are she learned to see herself as a burden. And it's exactly this distorted view that you carry into your romantic relationships. The lack of self-love starts there, when you weren't validated where you most needed to be welcomed. Imagine a child who always hears that they're dramatic, that they feel too much, that they're never good enough. They grow up doubting their own worth, looking for the love they didn't get at home in relationships. This becomes a breeding ground for emotional dependency and anxious attachment. As an adult, this woman ends up settling for too little, thinking she's already getting too much. And the cruelest thing, when someone treats her with respect, she becomes suspicious, because it doesn't resemble what she's learned about love. A powerful exercise is to write a letter to yourself, as if you were welcoming back the child you once were. Speak to her with compassion. Tell her what she needed to hear and never did. This kind of practice doesn't erase the past, but it does begin to reprogram the way you see yourself. And when the woman starts to treat you differently, she starts to accept you differently too. Breaking away from low self-esteem is not a magic bullet, but it is totally possible. And it starts with a simple but powerful step. Stop looking to others for the validation you never received from yourself. When a woman begins to look at herself with respect, she no longer tolerates what she used to accept in silence. She stops begging for attention and starts choosing more carefully. The truth is, no one values you more than you show them. If in a love relationship you're on alert, afraid of rejection or emotional abandonment, something needs to change. It's not about convincing the other person to stay. It's about you deciding not to stay where you feel small. A good exercise is to make a list of everything you've ever tolerated in the name of love. Then, next to each item, write down what you really deserved. This activates self-worth and begins to heal the emotional wounds that keep you stuck in this cycle. And do you know what happens when you start treating yourself with more emotional worth? Your choices change. You no longer get involved with those who make you feel emotionally insecure. You start to attract healthier bonds, where respect is the minimum and not a bonus. And then, reconstruction becomes liberation. Now tell me, how long will you accept so little, thinking that it's all you can have? How long will you call love what, deep down, is just emotional abandonment in disguise? You deserve presence, care, reciprocity, and not this constant feeling of walking on eggs to avoid being left. But to do that, you need to look at yourself with truth and courage. What in you still believes that you need to beg to be loved? What emotional wounds are still controlling your choices? If any part of what you've heard here has touched you, it's because there's already something inside you asking for change, and you don't need permission to start now. If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stick around. We're still going to talk a lot about self-esteem, emotional worthiness, and how to build a relationship where you don't have to diminish yourself to fit in.